I will now call to order the second public hearing on the City of Jersey Village Juvenile Curfew Ordinance. Everyone desiring to speak at this hearing should complete a public hearing comment card if they have not already done so and present the card to the City Secretary. Each speaker shall give his name and address so we have a proper record of this hearing. Our rules allow you 5 minutes to present your information. I would, however, encourage each speaker to be as brief and to the point as possible. The purpose of this second public hearing is to give all interested parties the right to appear and be heard on the need to continue the City of Jersey Village's Juvenile Curfew Ordinance. Council has heretofore conducted a review of the ordinance and conducted the first public hearing on October 15, 2018. Chief Eric Forrester will give a short presentation concerning the City of Jersey Village Juvenile Curfew Ordinance's effects on the community and the problems the ordinances was intended to remedy. Chief?
Mayor, Council, we're going to do just a few slides I hope will clear things up a little bit from last time. The few questions that I garnered from last time were how many contacts we have and what time of day that impacted the curfews. So if you look going from on your screen from left to right is our juvenile CAD entries. These are the amount of contacts that we have with juveniles from 2009 on the left to 2018 on the right. As you can see, the increase is pretty staggering. That doesn't mean they're breaking the law. That just means that these are contacts that we have with juveniles that end up in our CAD system. They're either a victim of a crime, they're a suspect of a crime, or they've been arrested or ticketed. So you can see that we're handling a lot more juveniles lately. The next question was how many contacts we make during juvenile curfew hours. Again, starting on the left, 2009, and ending on the right, which is 2018. That's a pretty big increase in the amount of contacts made with juveniles during curfew hours. Keep that number 110 in mind as we move forward. Second question was how many contacts were made ended up in curfew citations. 2015-16 is 41. 2016-17 is 34, 2017-18 is 23. So you can see we're contacting a lot more juveniles, but we're writing fewer tickets. That was a big question, was that you're contacting these people and you're issuing a lot of citations. That's not the case, but we are contacting more. Citations issued versus the nighttime curfew. As you can see, there are very few. And the reason why there are very few nighttime curfew tickets is because there are a lot more exceptions to that. The juveniles that we're contacting, if you go back to the 110 amount, we're still contacting a lot of these, but they all have a good excuse. They're coming from work, they're coming from a school function, whatever the case may be, family emergencies, whatever. So that led me to, and I apologize, no matter what we did to contrast, we couldn't change this. One of the things I keep hearing is, well, let's do away with the nighttime curfew or daytime curfew and keep the night. The numbers indicate we need the daytime curfew, not the nighttime curfew. Those are the citations issued. So in 2017-18, we wrote 23 citations during the day, 6 at night. So that means 23 of the 110 did not have a sufficient reason to be out during the day. 2016, it was 34, 2015 was 41. So I hope that shows you the difference in the need of the daytime curfew versus the nighttime curfew. I don't believe I did a well enough job last time explaining that, why that's so important to us. Juvenile traffic stops. 2015 was 136, 2016 205, 2017, 18 is 264. So as you can see, there is a large amount of juvenile contacts in Jersey Village. And what you're going to hear is you're going to hear people talk about studies about this and studies about that. Those studies are not Jersey Village, Texas. These numbers are from Jersey Village, Texas. That's what's very important, and that's why we have to look at our numbers. Last slide is one of the most important. The amount of juvenile arrests, 2015 was 16 total, 16-17 was 18 total, last year was 31 total. I think there's a story in the numbers, and the numbers are we need the curfew. Thank you very much.
All right, any questions for Chief from council?
Chief, I can appreciate that there's a lot more juvenile contacts. In fact, I'd say there's probably been a lot more contacts with people in general. JVPD has issued a lot more citations, so it's only to be expected that there would be, just as there's been an uptick in the total number of citations, you're probably going to capture within that a proportionate amount of juveniles. How many of those contacts how many of those stops were developed based on probable cause that existed solely due to the fact that you had the juvenile curfew ordinance?
We do not have that number specifically available. I know it's statistically it's valid, and a majority of those probably came off of traffic stops. But I know many, many good arrests have also come because that is our probable cause. I know because I've made a few of those myself. So it is indicative of more contacts with juveniles in our area.
And so what you're saying is the majority of those stops would have happened whether we had the ordinance in place or not?
Yes and no.
You may have to explain there, because if the majority of them occurred as a result of probable cause generated by some offense other than the ordinance, then certainly the stop would have been legal whether the ordinance existed or not.
It's all supposition at this point. It's all anecdotal. We don't know. We don't have any way to break those down.
In the chief's defense, the way that recording happens and data's taken in, there's just no way to answer that question.
No, I get it. I just, I'll bring up my point about that later.
Part of the entries that I see, there was 264 traffic stops of juveniles and 269 total entries in CAD of juveniles. Are traffic stops of juveniles part of that CAD?
Only if they're run as a driver or receive a citation.
Okay.
Just to be clear, and I know this is being repetitive, but you do see that the curfew is a necessary tool in your toolkit for curbing crime?
I believe it is a leg of a very important element, yes. Do I think we're going to flounder without it? No, I do not. But in this day and age of increased contacts with juveniles, no matter how we get to that point, we're still the same size department as we were before, and I think it benefits us to use what tools that we have available to combat crime.
If I may, Chief, I know that obviously in law enforcement you want as many tools available as possible, and I get that, and I would never blame you for wanting to seek as many tools as possible. If you did not have the juvenile curfew ordinance, do you believe that you have enough tools otherwise at your disposal to maintain our current level of safety in the community? Obviously understanding there may be some slight variation, but as a general supposition, would you say crime would probably not substantially increase?
You're an attorney. That's a great question. I would love to sit here and tell you if we do the ordinance, this is going to happen. If we don't do the ordinance, this is not going to happen. I have no way of knowing. I believe I've expressed to council numerous times, and when we added the additional person at nights, I believe we're at a point of saturation with our department where we're kind of keeping our head above water, but it's precarious. We're running into big city problems with a small town police force. So just be aware of that and be cognizant, but I can't give you an answer what's going to happen.
So if we got you a few more officers, that could potentially make it a wash.
Well, I don't want to look like I'm blackmailing you either. So
Oh, no, this is a very legitimate question.
it's just a very useful tool. And I can't tell you what's going to happen. Either way, it's great to have it. I don't see a double-digit increase if we don't. So I think that answers your question.
Councilmember Warren, I would like to add that the effect of the ordinance could also have a deterrent factor, and that is something you can't ascertain, and the chief wouldn't, in terms of what he's describing as his tools, the ordinance itself is a tool for deterrence.
Sure, I understand.
Chief, do we know, you had 31 citations issued for juvenile curfew violations. Do we know what the resolution of those are?
I inquired about them, and they have to manually go back and pull each one. Those are not in the PD side. That's all handled over through courts. We just transitioned to new software, or transitioning to new software to make that a little bit easier to track, but we have no way of knowing right now.
If a juvenile receives a curfew violation, is that on the same level as a traffic citation?
It's a little less, but yes,
A little
equivalency.
A little less than a traffic citation. Okay. One of the, just as a comment, I try to look for a rationale on how to evaluate the curfew, and I choose to look at it as a time and place element. For example, if there's a shopping center in Jersey Village and there's a car with a person in that car at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, that's not unusual. If it's 3 a.m., person in the car, same situation, exact same circumstance, but there's a time element to that, and a place. That person does not belong in that environment at that time of night, under most circumstances. I would venture to say that a police officer would be more likely to investigate a car with a person sitting in it at 3 a.m. than they were at 3 p.m. So I choose to use that rationale when looking at the juvenile curfew. A juvenile at 11 a.m., where they should be in school, is more unusual than a juvenile at 7 p.m. walking the street. So in terms of how I am going to evaluate this, it's time and place criteria. So just a matter of note.
For me, I mean, if you look at this day versus night curfew violations chart, 98 over the last 3 years, there's basically been 98 juveniles walking around the streets of Jersey Village with no good reason enough to avoid a citation. Were all 98 of those kids are they bad kids? Probably not. Are they all gonna commit a crime? Probably not. But all our officers did was initiate contact. And that's what this tool did, was ask them, hey, where are you? Where are you going? Why aren't you in school? And so I feel like this is simply a valuable tool that just helps our small town with 3,400 kids that show up every single day in and out, mitigate, whether it mitigates 1 crime or 10 crimes. I think that's a valuable tool.
I'm not going to talk on this a whole lot. And I fully support the police department. I don't claim to have all the experience the chief does. This is a tool that I don't think needs to be there, because of the 110 stopped, 79% of them were let go without a citation. They met an exemption. Those are the kids that I think they shouldn't have had to been stopped. Whole reason I bring it up. Both major political parties have it in their platform to get rid of these. There's lots of studies, both in just singular cities, but also national studies that went over tons of cities, that you can say, yes, they weren't for Jersey Village, but they're all showing that these curfews are not meeting their goals. And there's lots of tools available. And I would agree it's about a 1% change, not 1%, single digit change that you're going to see. Do I want to see that change? Absolutely not. Do I think this change is worth it just from the fact that I think juveniles shouldn't be deprived of the right to walk around? I'm willing to give that up. Other people may not. That's it. That's about all I'm going to say on the issue.
No, he answered my questions. He says he needs the tool. That's what I'm thinking is the important issue here. We have a very good police chief. We do not have problems with our police officers and their dealings with the juveniles. I'm sorry?
Never said they did.
Okay, I know. As long as the standards in our police department are upheld and the interaction that they have with the juveniles are showing the respect that people deserve, then I'm going to trust our police chief.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and move into public hearing comments. I got several public hearing comment cards. First one I have is John Bockham.
All right, hello, Mayor and City Council. My name is John Bockham. I live at 15325 Chichester Lane. Speaking today to encourage you to reject the reauthorization of the juvenile curfew ordinance. If you're not aware, juvenile curfew ordinances are strongly opposed by the Republican and Democratic Party of Texas platforms, the American Civil Liberties Union, and the conservative-leaning Texas Public Policy Foundation's Right on Crime campaign. Criticism of our juvenile ordinance, curfew ordinance is not a partisan issue, and I'm not here today to disparage the chief or any of his staff. I know y'all provide excellent services. I would be speaking against these ordinances in any city that I lived in because I believe them to be unjust. Youth in Jersey Village should not be subject to pretextual stops for status offenses that are only illegal because of the kid's status as a minor. This raises a complex and undecided argument on the constitutionality of the curfew laws in general. The chief mentioned the Fifth Circuit ruling. There have been other rulings in other districts that have said these rulings are in fact unconstitutional because they're not narrowly tailored enough. Our officers should make stops based on suspicious activity or a criminal act, not just stopping by judging someone's age. Youth are not predisposed to commit crime and should not be feared for simply being in public during curfew hours. At a time when the state of Texas is moving away from the overcriminalization of youth, Jersey Village sadly seems to be moving in the opposite direction. In 2016, the Campbell Collaboration, a nonprofit that synthesizes research studies for policymakers, did a systemic review of research literature on juvenile curfews programs. They examined over 7,000 studies and synthesized the most 12 rigorous studies. The report stated, evidence suggests that juvenile curfews are ineffective at reducing crime and victimization. While that might not have focused on data in Jersey Village, it focused on a broad enough, wide enough cast of net that Jersey Village would have to be an amazing anomaly outlier for it also to prove that it's not an ineffective solution here in Jersey Village. Another study previous to that was published by the National Criminal Justice Reference Service in 2003 found that empirical studies of the impact of juvenile curfew laws failed to support the argument that curfews reduce crime and juvenile victimization. We can rely on emotional reactions, or we can rely on the data showing this policy is not needed. The reality is that juvenile crime rates are decreasing across the country and are currently at all-time lows. It does not seem like the burden of proof has been met to extend the ordinance based on the reduction in juvenile crime or juvenile victimization. While the state of Texas has decriminalized truancy, our ordinance allows for a minor to be charged with a Class C misdemeanor, which introduces these minors to the criminal justice system. These cases are heard in adult court, not juvenile court, with no guaranteed right to counsel, and many times the minors are forced to pay fines and fees that they or their families simply cannot afford. Additional collateral consequences of a Class C misdemeanor conviction may compromise college, employment, housing, and military prospects. Research and common sense confirm that criminalization of youth, particularly for low-level offenses, is harmful. Truancy issues, including relatively minor behavior like leaving campus to eat lunch, should be corrected through our educational system, not through our criminal justice system. Studies have shown that early court involvement increases kids' risk of engaging in future delinquent behaviors and moving deeper into the criminal justice system. This ordinance criminalizes kids for behaviors that pose little to no risk for public safety. I urge the City Council to stop the criminalization of youth by ending the juvenile curfew ordinance. And I just will touch that, as I mentioned, this is not to disparage the police department. I believe that the chief and his officers have the tools, the training, and the knowledge to effectively create probable cause if they think there is a crime being committed, has been committed, or about to be committed. This tool simply isn't needed, in my opinion. Thank you.
Fred Zehay.
Mayor, City Council, thank you for the opportunity. I'm Fred Zehay, 8409 Hawaii Lane. I have already communicated to all of you my thoughts on the curfew. I am in favor of renewing the curfew. Again, I see this, and the words have already been spoken. I'm not going to reiterate what I've said. You guys have seen. I've also spoken with several of you about it as well as the chief. I do see it as a useful tool that can be helpful. I haven't seen, and I think the evidence is there has been no abuse. I see no great damage done by a youth being asked by a policeman what you're out and about. I think they do it in a good professional manner. The other words that the city attorney took is a deterrent. Having raised 2 kids, and I would ask you all to think about in your backgrounds, maybe you've raised kids, teenage kids, maybe you're about to, or maybe you can think back to your own teenage years, but there's nothing like a good deterrent to prevent you from taking that next step, doing something that maybe somebody else thought was really funny, and get yourself into a bind. So I see the curfew as a good deterrent to preventing future problems. And again, I just don't see any damage. If you're about to do something and you get stopped, maybe it's a good thing that you had that maybe you had that opportunity to speak to a policeman. If you're out there minding your own business, all you're going to do is maybe get to know a policeman a little bit better. So I see no problem at all with renewing it, and I would encourage you to. Thank you.
Susan Edwards. Susan Edwards.
Thank you for letting me speak. I'm Susan Edwards, 16001 Jersey Drive. I want to echo everything that Fred Zehay just said. I've spoken to most of you and to Chief Forrester about this curfew ordinance. I am in favor of it. As a longtime resident of Jersey Village, and knowing that most people who live here in Jersey Village have chosen to live here in Jersey Village because of our police department and fire department, I just really don't understand why people would want to take this tool away from our police department. I feel like most of us are raising our children to respect our policemen. I don't understand why we feel like our children are going to be afraid if a policeman approaches them and asks them where they're going or why they're out. That just baffles me. I've raised 2 children here in Jersey Village, and now I have 2 grandchildren who are here in the village quite often. In fact, I have 1 grandson at home right now that we feel quite comfortable leaving him at home alone right now while we're up here at this city council meeting. He is a 7th grader, and I think he's old enough to be at home alone while we're here, because we do live in a safe community. Anyway, like I said, my husband and I are in favor of this curfew. I hope that it gets voted in again. Thank you.
Nancy Yetter, did you want to speak in this one too? Okay.
Just kind of threw me when they said two. My name's Nancy Yetter. I live at 16121 Capri Drive. Last month at the meeting, Mr. Singleton made a comment about leaving the truancy issues to the truant officers for the school district. And it got me to thinking. I wondered how many truant officers there were in Cy-Fair and what kind of coverage territory they had or how it operated. So I called the school district and was sent to Student Services Department, and a very knowledgeable woman who I think has been there a long time because she answered all of my questions, named Nora Coretta, told me that we do not have truant officers. We have 5 attendance officers, and they are office personnel. They do not go out in the field. They do not stop children or anything like that. When attendance records show that a child has excessive absences or no excuse being turned in for their absences, then they get involved and contact the parent, try and find out what's going on, things like that. The job of what I think a lot of people think of as truancy, or looking for kids or stopping kids or talking to them out in public, falls to the Cy-Fair Police Department. And, each campus has, well, I say each campus, I don't know about the elementary schools. The Jersey Village has a police officer located on campus, and it would be his job. So I don't see where that helps us much in the neighborhood. He is located on campus and might try and stop them or see a lot of coming and going, but he's not out and about in our neighborhood looking for students and asking them what they're doing and things like that. So anyway, that was my information from Nora Coretta with Cy-Fair School District. And the whole district has 5 attendance officers. I thought that was like, whoa, not much good. Anyway, thank you.
Officer Limerick.
Thank you for letting me speak. In addition to working for the city of Jersey Village, I'm speaking today as a citizen. I also live here in the city. And while I can't claim I didn't help Chief with any of the research on this or know what every officer does or the types of stops and things that go on, I know that anytime you give a governmental agency or police power, there's a concern about it being used in a bad way or abused. I can tell you a couple cases that I can give you a brief description of where it was used in the past couple months that came to my mind, and I think is probably the way we would hope it would be used. In one scenario, we had a 17-year-old adult and a juvenile that were riding bicycles, and there was a PC. Kids riding bicycle down the street is not against the law. However, we had a nighttime curfew. They were stopped and questioned, and it ended up that they were going out and doing burglaries. They'd actually burglarized several vehicles and stolen firearms out of vehicles outside the city of Jersey Village in Harris County. And then they had just driven into Jersey Village, and officers came into contact with them. Based off of that, the juvenile ended up getting his charge dropped. The adult's, I think, still pending. Another case was a nighttime stop. It was an adult driver. Normally, if you don't have any reason to speak to the passenger, you don't identify the passenger or speak to them. Concerning a traffic stop, it was a regular traffic stop, but it appeared to be juvenile, and they spoke to that juvenile. Led to the another group of juveniles approached them, and it led to the discovery that they were staying in a local motel hotel room here. And a further investigation led to the discovery that this was a gang of young men that had been for some months burglarizing vehicles, and there was a recovery of about, I believe, 8 or 9 firearms that were stolen out of that motel room, many of which I returned in my capacity as a evidence and property room, and some computers and other items. So I just wanted to give you some examples of how it would be used or was useful in certain scenarios and certain situations. I can't speak to, I can only speak to myself, and I'm not on patrol anymore. You know, I don't know how other officers would use it, and it's not my position to say if it's right or wrong for the city. I just thought I would at least give that sort of perspective of how I know it has been used. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right, that's all the comment cards that I have. So seeing that there's no one else desiring to speak on, did you want to talk during the public hearing, or did you want to talk during general citizen comments, Marilee? So, seeing that there's no one else desiring to speak, I will now close the second public hearing on the City of Jersey Village Juvenile Curfew Ordinance. Moving to item 2, consider ordinance number 2018-23, continuing in effect ordinance number 1995-20, adopted on November 20th, 1995, and codified as Chapter 42, Article 3, Division 3, entitled Curfew, reflecting compliance with all requirements of state law and reaffirming the need to continue the curfew ordinance and providing a penalty of an amount not less than $50, no more than $500 for each day of violation of any provision hereof, making certain findings, repealing all ordinances or parts of ordinances inconsistent or conflicting herewith, providing for severability and providing for an effective date. Chief Eric Forrester.
Mayor, Council, I believe we've heard arguments on both sides, and valid and well taken. But again, I would just ask council to consider and vote your heart on this one.
Okay, thank you, Chief. Looking for some discussion on ordinance number 2018-23.
A couple of comments I found kind of peculiar. It says that, there were some comments that both the Republican and Democratic platforms are against juvenile curfews, yet it's still in place. So if that's truly something they agree on, then perhaps it can be addressed at the state or federal level. So we can certainly wait for that. As far as being unconstitutional, that too, I think, will work its way through the courts, and will, if it is unconstitutional, we'll certainly get that feedback. But until then, to all the comments we heard, I think it's a useful tool. I think it puts the time in place, criteria in place to enforce laws and to prevent crime. So in my opinion, I think it's a useful tool and one that should stay in place until something changes.
Pertaining to the constitutionality, I've already had a discussion with the chief, and apparently our version of the curfew, the juvenile curfew ordinance, is already passed by the Fifth Circuit and been approved.
I would disagree with that a little bit. First of all, the Fifth Circuit decision you're referring to, and you're right, almost every city, and I don't blame them, almost every city virtually copied word for word the Dallas ordinance that, and I'm probably going to butcher the name, Qutub versus Strauss, and that decision that was decided upon. Now, the problem with that is, and I apologize if this gets too far into the weeds, typically under a strict scrutiny analysis, in that case, the question was whether or not there was an equal protection of the application of laws upon youth compared to adults. And the court found that there was a question regarding a fundamental right, the right to free movement. It's a right we all enjoy today. If one of us goes out and decides that we want to go get Whataburger at 1 a.m., all of us as adults have the right to do that. If you're in Jersey Village and if you are under the age of 17 and you decide you want to go out and get Whataburger at 1 a.m., you do not have a right to do that under ordinance. And that ultimately is the question that was put before the court, is whether or not that unequal application of law was constitutional. Now, in order to be able to survive that sort of challenge, it is subject to strict scrutiny, which means that the city had to show that they were trying to achieve a compelling government interest and doing so in the most narrowly tailored way possible, and that there were no reasonable alternatives to that particular ordinance. And that typically is a fact-based, case-by-case instance. In other words, just because Dallas has a compelling government interest and that this is the only way to achieve it, does not mean that Jersey Village has a compelling government interest and that exact ordinance is the only way to achieve it. So if we think that there's some sort of safe harbor that exists in this case, I'm sorry, but we're fooling ourselves. That's just not the case. Now, that being said, I think that fundamentally, let's set aside sort of the legal speak here for a moment. I have a serious concern with this for a few reasons. Number one, if we are talking about someone's fundamental rights, is just the fact that a ordinance is a useful tool, one of many, is that the threshold that we want to use to affect someone's fundamental rights? This decision everyone's here citing in justification of this says that it is a fundamental right. So that's not what's at dispute here. It's just a question of whether or not our infringement of that fundamental right is justified. And so if our new standard is whether it's a useful tool, I'm really afraid, because constitutional rights exist not because we all get together and decide this is a good thing. They exist because a majority of people may get together and decide something's a good thing that's a very bad thing for a minority of people. And the reason why I'm even more concerned in this instance is we're dealing with a minority of people who are not enfranchised. And I'm not suggesting that children should be able to vote, but it's not like a horde of children can get together and form a pack and decide to run a candidate against us and go to the polls and vote us all out because they don't like what we're doing. The mere political process doesn't work for them in that fashion, and yet they do have constitutional rights. Not in the exact same way all of us do, but they do have some fundamental constitutional rights, and freedom of movement is one of those. And so I think that we have a heightened interest to be very careful with when we choose to exercise this, and should only do so when we need to and when we have no other choice. And that's really what it boils down to with strict scrutiny. It's necessary because there's a serious issue that has to be addressed with it, and we have no other choice. What I've heard today is it's not that necessary because we really don't even have clear statistics on how often it's been used. We also have heard that it sounds like there's some other options that we haven't considered. I'm more than happy to hire a couple of extra police officers if it means we're not infringing on someone's fundamental rights. And the reason why I'm being so serious about this, Greg mentioned, hey, let's leave it to the courts to decide. And I understand why most political bodies do it. Me standing up here, railing against something that's extremely popular, probably isn't going to go too well over the ballot box. I'm up for election in May. I recognize that difficulty. But this is something that I'm willing to stand up to because it's the right thing. Also because when I took an oath for this office, as all of us did, I swore that I would faithfully execute the duties of this office and that I would, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution and laws of the United States and of this state. And so again, I think that the reason the state requires us to look at this juvenile ordinance every 3 years is because we need to determine on a fact basis, based on what we know now, whether or not it's necessary. And I think that that's done because of the constitutional issues involved. And if we simply sit up here and say it's a useful tool, well, guess what? If we decide to strip out the age requirement, and let's just make this curfew apply to everyone, regardless of age, I bet that would be a useful tool. Chief could make a ton of arrests by just saying after, curfew hours, anyone caught on the street is subject to being pulled over. You wouldn't have to worry about probable cause ever. You just check the box that says curfew, right? That shouldn't be the standard, and that's why. It's a perfect example why we don't do these things. We dive, and I know a lot of people have said, hey, I get it, the whole legal mumbo jumbo, I get that you've got all of these things having to do with the Constitution that are important to you. They should be important to all of us because it's the only thing that allows us to be sitting up here, only thing that allows you guys to be sitting out here and railing for or against this thing, and for us to discuss whether or not to keep this in place. I'm not going to come back on that. That's all I have to say. I think everyone here kind of has their understanding of their role in this, but I wanted to make sure that people understood why I've been so adamantly against this, because I really do think it's a sensitive issue, and being a tool in a toolbox is not enough.
Yeah, I just want to say that I fully agree with everything you're saying about constitutional rights. And I'm a strong believer that we need to protect what we have in this country. But one of the biggest issues we have going on in this society today is who can own a gun and who can't. And it's the same thing. The safety of the public has to be considered. If you got background checks and they're looking at whether you have past psychological issues or not, as to whether you can own a gun or not, affects public safety. And we have a responsibility to address public safety. But those people with the psychological issues also have constitutional rights. So that's a scale that we have to put the weights on one side or the other all the time. And that's what we're doing in this case.
I bet a gun ban would be a useful tool too, right? Does anyone want to justify it on that basis? Probably not.
All right, I think council's got an idea where we're going to fall on this. Calling for a motion on the ordinance.
Mayor, Council, I understand completely both sides of the argument, and I respect that. And I want to say, you and I talked earlier, Gary, about this, and I agree, depends on how we do it. We're cognizant of the issues. We're not heavy-handed with this. We don't want to be heavy-handed with this. We're training for it. It's been in place since I've been here, but we're aware of it. And we're not going to push the boundaries and go into the gray area. And I wanted to be clear with council, we're handling this carefully. And that's very important. I think that you guys understand that.
And if I may, just one more thing. I agree with you, Chief. My statement, in fact, is, as it should be, this analysis should be enforcement neutral. We should not be asking ourselves how our particular police department with these personnel enforce it, because, and I hope you guys are here for a long time, but at any moment, it could be, for whatever reason, a different group of people, and what they have is not their honor and dedication and commitment and experience. What they have when they leave, which I hope they don't, and someone else comes in, is the ordinance. That's the part we have to affect. And we should be looking at this as if we are completely blind as to who's enforcing it.
I'm kind of going back, Gary. You said that you were voting because he said he needed the tool. And you said that you're strong in the constitutional part of it. But 87 juveniles are stopped and released in order to enforce the need for the 23. Do you find that the data provided, even though we can't get all the real data because it's just not available, you find that this backs up the need for the ordinance?
I'll go back to my comparison to the gun rights and the incident at Sandy Hook. I mean, how many people out there with past mental issues would like to own a gun, and you stop them all, but in so doing, you may have saved all the kids at Sandy Hook.
Looking for a motion on the ordinance.
I'll make a motion to approve ordinance number 2018-23.
I'll second.
There's been a motion second. Is there any additional discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. I'll move us to item E this evening, citizen comments.